Hello, everyone. Welcome to Latino Ed Talks con Amanda Fernandez. Hope you all have your cafecitos and your topo chicos with you for the first of a series of conversations bringing national education leaders together to hash out the critical issues and innovations that are affecting the lives of our Latino students and educators and families. Today, we have, of course, the eminent Amanda Fernandez, CEO and founder of Latinos for Education, which focuses on building Latino education leaders so they can bring about education equity and access for the Latino community. And also, we have the Honorable Representative Joaquín Castro, who has represented Texas's 20th District in Congress since 2013 and who happens to be my congressman. So, welcome to you too. If you want to know more about these two, you can Google it, but we're sort of dispensing with longer bios so that we can jump right in. And to that end, I'd like to ask our speakers, starting with Amanda and followed by Congressman Castro, to give us the short version of your college journey, telling us what you wish you had received or what you didn't receive, and to get to your goal or to your next step in that journey. Amanda?
Thank you, Suzanne. So I'll start with the story of my background. I am the daughter of Cuban exiles who believed that a good education was really going to be the vehicle for their children to survive and prosper in this country. I will say, though, that my own educational journey was one that I didn't have educators or mentors, frankly, who understood my experience as a Latina in my community, my upbringing, my cultura. And I didn't have mentors in my education experience that inspired me to go to college. I would say that I was actually a disengaged student. I didn't feel like college was something for me, even though it was an expectation of my parents. So at the same time, I feel like I did go to college. I'll say that I barely received a bachelor's degree. I got through. And then 10 years later, I was able to get my master's degree from Fordham University. But overall, that experience really stuck with me, that I just didn't have the support, the adult support that I needed to help me navigate and think for myself that I could aspire to higher education and quality higher education. So that whole experience has led me to launch Latinos for Education. We're now 8 years old as a fairly new nonprofit. I realized in my career in education that far too many Latino students like me felt invisible in the education system. They didn't see teachers or school leaders that reflected their backgrounds and identities, or celebrated our historias in curriculum. So, our organization, as you mentioned, is working to address increasing representation of Latino educators in the education system, recruitment, retaining, and advancing Latino leadership in education, while mobilizing Latino leaders around a shared policy agenda so that all of our Latino students and families have access to a great education.
Thank you, Amanda. Congressman Castro, I know you've
Yeah,
had.
well,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
First, it's great to be with you, Suzanne and Amanda, and glad to have this conversation because I think it's so important for our Latino community, our students, our parents, just everybody who is working to make sure that more of our kids go on to college and graduate. I grew up on the deep west side of San Antonio. We moved around 4 times, but the west side of San Antonio, or growing up on the west side of San Antonio, would be equivalent, even though they're different cities and neighborhoods, to growing up in East Los Angeles, for example. So my neighborhoods were 90% or more usually, mostly Mexican American. And both of my parents had been the first in their families to go to college. So my mom went to school in San Antonio and graduated from Our Lady Lake University, and my dad spent a few years at community college and then transferred to UT Austin in the early 1960s and got a degree in math. And my parents were together until I was 8. But my brother and I were always, I think, guided by them and expected by them to go on to college and to graduate. And, and so I'm very grateful for the expectations that they put on us and the guidance that they gave us. But you asked the question, in my experience as a student, what was lacking? A few things, eventually for me, everything turned out well. I ended up going from San Antonio to Stanford University and graduated, and then went on to law school at Harvard and got my law degree. So that part of the story obviously turns out well, but there was a lot of turmoil before that. I didn't know right away that I was going to go to Stanford University. In fact, I remember seeking out advice in high school from counselors and really finding it hard to get. Not because the counselors didn't care, but because the counselors were so spread thin with a lot of other duties besides academic advising. And there was really only one counselor per class for the senior class, for example. And so one thing that I've worked on while I've been in office is improving the college guidance system that we have in our schools, the college advising system that we have in our schools. The other part of it is just the financial aid component. I guess I was fortunate in the end to be able to take out a lot of money in loans and then be able to pay it back for college. But the year that my brother and I, Julian, got accepted to Stanford and then went there, I think my mom, who was a single parent by that time, had made about $19,000 as an income that year. So you can imagine for her, trying to send 2 students or two of her kids on to college was very tough. And it was tough for us as well. And I know that so many families face that same dilemma. So fortunately, I had a chance to work on those issues as well.
Thank you, Congressman. This is really interesting because you guys, the two of you both hit on an important point, and you gave sort of 2 different scenarios. And I'm not trying to out anyone in terms of age or anything, but we do have a couple of different generations represented. And it is interesting to think about whether the change between those generations has been that significant. But also, I thought what was really interesting about what both of you said was the role your parents played and how important that was. And I think we got a real sense of that when the pandemic happened. Parents were having to take up the slack when schools were closed. But they were also, many of our Latino parents were having to go stay at work. They didn't have the privilege of being able to stay home and work. I work from home, and I considered it a privilege. So we do know that the pandemic had a really difficult and bad effect on our students. It really impacted our students. Where are we today? Have we recovered from that? Do you see that? Any trends there, Amanda? And then I would ask you, Congressman Castro, is the pandemic and its effect out of the minds of people in Congress now and seen as something now that's been overcome and we got through that, yay? Or is there enough attention to its impact or what we might have to do in the future to make sure it doesn't have any kind of bad impact on students?
Suzanne, thanks for your question. So I think we can all remember back to the time of the pandemic. And we all know that the Latino community was disproportionately affected by the impact of the pandemic. And so that's the starting point in terms of where we're at in education right now. I think the statistics are such that we're at least 5 years behind now. Children lost about 5 years of growth in education. And so we're trying to play catch up to that. That's sort of the baseline, sort of where we are as a country. And then think about how the Latino community was disproportionately affected. And I think there are other issues that continue to affect our community to this day. So with that, let me talk a little bit about some of the trends overall that are happening in education right now. It's important to stress in my book, and for those of you who are listening right now, how important the Latino student population is to the current and future state of education. And I firmly believe that when we're having discussions about education, we need to explicitly be talking about Latinos, given that we are the fastest growing demographic in the nation and continue to be. So a few statistics for you. Between 2009 and 2020, the percentage of public school students who were Latino increased from 22% to 28%. And by 2060, that number will grow to about 32% plus. We know that in many districts across the country, we're far beyond that number. 80, 90% of our students, the congressman even talked about San Antonio and being majority Latino. Yet this, the increase in student demographics, unfortunately, is not reflected in the educator workforce, where only 9% of all teachers nationwide identify as Latino, and that same percentage holds true for school principals. So when we talk about the state of education, we need to start by recognizing that there's this huge representation gap between Latino students and educators. And this matters to this discussion because the representation gap has a direct correlation with student outcomes and their preparation for going to college and accessing and completing. So in terms of some trends that we're seeing, the first is that Latino students continue to experience opportunity gaps even before they begin kindergarten. Latinos have the lowest participation rate in early childhood education programs when compared to other racial ethnic groups. This is because in the majority of Latino neighborhoods where our families live, there are not a sufficient number of programs for them to access. And so when you look at student outcomes in K through 12, we've seen some progress when it comes to high school graduation rates. And we did see that dip in the pandemic. We are starting to see things increase, but not enough. The average graduation rate is now at about 80%. And we have seen some progress on college enrollment. We saw that dip in enrollment. We're starting to see some progress for Latino students. In fall of 2021, there were 3.7 million Latino students enrolled in degree-granting post-secondary institutions. Again, we see these gaps, though, when it comes to Latino students obtaining college degrees or credentials. The average college graduation rate for Latinos hovers at about 40%, compared to 64% for white students. So like you mentioned, across the board, we saw outcomes for Latino students drop on all these measures during the pandemic, but we're hopeful that we'll see more upward momentum again, especially with policies such as those that the Congressman has put forward and in helping more Latino students obtain access to college and college completion.
Thank you, Amanda. And Congressman?
Yeah, I mean, you asked the question about the pandemic and whether members of Congress are still think it's a big deal, still paying attention to it and its after effects. And honestly, Susanna, it depends who you ask in Congress in terms of how seriously they're still taking it. I take it very seriously, and I agree with Amanda that our kids lost years of school. If you think about it, all of a sudden, I remember the early days of the pandemic. I was getting frantic calls from principals and superintendents, school board members, because we simply didn't have a system in place in most school districts to teach virtually. Teachers had not been trained on being effective teaching virtually. Students were not trained essentially on how to learn virtually. You had a lot of students, up to a quarter of students in a lot of districts, who simply had disappeared for a while or were not showing up to virtual class. So, in some senses, of course, we've rebounded. Students are back in class, for example. There is a silver lining to a lot of this, which is out of necessity, we closed some of the digital divide. because all of a sudden you needed to provide the students a way to learn virtually. And then the Congress and the president, on top of that, created programs like the Affordable Connectivity Program, meant to expand broadband and internet access, not just to students, but to communities across the country. So there were some silver linings that come out of that. But I don't have any doubt in my mind that there are lasting impacts, negative impacts to all students, but in particular, vulnerable communities like the Latino community, having gone through that pandemic. And those are on top of the challenges that already existed, not just in K through 12, but also in higher education as well.
Yeah, its timing was interesting because I think there was some momentum as we were seeing this increase that was happening, and some recognition of things that needed to be slightly different or adjusted. But a lot of that just got, and then you have this population increase that's happening at this time. I mean, some of the larger populations within the community are in Generation Z and continuing. We're just continuing to grow and grow, and those young people are getting into public school and then into college, etc. We hear, you mentioned, Amanda, increased enrollment, and we hear a lot about this, and it's sort of the good news part for Latinos, like, oh, more Latinos are enrolled in school and more in college, and which obviously is a good thing. But I always wonder is, how are we really doing in terms of keeping up with our numbers? Because we've always lagged behind and our numbers are increasing. Are we seeing more Latinos in college because as a result of our numbers growing, or are we seeing better systems, more wraparound services, things that are actually attracting or more access, bringing in Latinos into college education? And then on that, I'd like to see, what do we more need to do to prepare Latino students for going into college, getting into college, getting graduate degrees, getting doctorates. How do we do better at that?
So I think it's a both and. Your question about, is it a question of numbers, simply that the demographic is growing? So are we now just seeing higher enrollment because of the demographic increase? I think that's part of it. And I think what I do want to sort of call out, that those numbers of increase are much more disproportionate on the female side than the male side of Latinos. I want to call that out because I think it's important to note that we are not seeing the same rates of growth of enrollment of our Latino males going to college. Mm-hmm. And with that, why I say it's an and, because I think as a result of the pandemic, as a result of increased funding coming into our states, we saw a lot more attention being paid to these gaps that were happening and that were being exacerbated because of the pandemic. So what you started seeing, and I'll speak to Massachusetts where I live, was much more recognition that we had to make bigger and bolder investments in our education system at large, across early childhood, K-12, and higher ed. On the higher ed side, I think what you've seen are some important developments in terms of providing more equitable access and helping to increase enrollment. At the community college level is one place where there was increased investment in ensuring more affordable access to community college, since that's a place where more Latinos start their educational trajectory. And so that's been encouraging to see that there's more investment in career pathways, in early college pathways that start in high school, and providing pathways for high school students to start seeing themselves in education, higher education. And that's been really exciting to see, because these are really promising practices. And it's then leading to more attention being paid of the issues that we're facing that exist in K through 12 around wraparound services in particular, of so many kids needing so many other supports and able to thrive in their educational experience. Well, the same holds true for our higher ed students. And so that attention that's being paid, I will say I haven't seen it before. And it's good to see because it's so important. That is one of the main reasons why so many of our young people cannot persist through higher education, because they don't have the sufficient supports around them. It's not just about affordability. It's not just about the academic support. It's about food security. It's about access to healthcare. All of those pieces really matter in this equation of making sure that many more of our Latino community can again access higher education and thrive in their experience so that they can end up graduating.
And Congressman, I know you've been in for a while, in the Congress for a while, so you've had many things that you've worked on. But are there any proposals or ideas or things that you have seen get through funding that you've done through an appropriations provision or something that you think is helping bring up that enrollment and may address some of the things that Amanda brought up just
Sure.
now?
I mean, well, we just announced yesterday about a $4.5 million grant for the San Antonio Independent School District for seven of its high schools to help increase the number of students who go on to college or who are ready for the workforce, if that's what they choose, with credentials, for example. So, we're continuing to pursue those opportunities for San Antonio, where I am, and I know other members of Congress for their respective communities. But, when I think about getting more students to go to college and then getting them to graduate, because it's really those two fundamental components, I think generationally we face different challenges. So for the longest time, we conflated two things. We conflated being quote unquote college ready with actually guiding kids to college. So those are actually two different systems. So a school can be very good at teaching somebody math and history and English. In other words, getting them substantively prepared as students to go to college. But unless you have a robust college guidance system, then there's a lot of people that are going to fall through the cracks, right? And so the problem that I described for myself with a very weak college advising system in my school is one that for generations was replicated across the country. And until recently, it's gotten better. And Amanda's right. Now, schools have gotten better about working with community colleges, for example, on dual crediting, so that by the time somebody graduates, they've already got a lot of credits and they're essentially done with a year or two of college. So those are incredibly important. And then on the higher ed side, when you get students to college, we've had great challenges there. Our community colleges in Texas, for example, many of them had lower graduation rates than our high schools. And even our universities. I remember probably 15 years ago seeing a statistic for the University of Texas at San Antonio, and the 6-year graduation rate was 32%. So, you're getting a lot of people there, but the institutions are essentially sieves at that point. And there's a lot of people who are not graduating. A lot of people get caught up in this work school tug of war. A lot of people from the Latino community, because we're of modest means, and they don't make enough money just to dedicate their time to go to college, so they have to work. And there's this tension between work hours and school hours, and a lot of people end up either out of necessity or some other preference putting aside school and just dedicating themselves to work. But then they never reach that dream of becoming a nurse or a doctor or a lawyer or whatever it is that they wanted to do. And so a lot of the legislation that I have proposed and pursued is trying to get in the middle of those issues. So I proposed legislation on helping community colleges work with universities on transfer credits, and then on reverse transferring, somebody that's gone to a university who went to community college to be able to go back and get their associate's degree because of the college, the classes that they've taken. So there's many different challenges within both the K through 12 and the higher ed system that we've tried to address in recent years.
Yeah, no, I community college is definitely something I want to get to, but I want to go off script just a little bit here because some of what you discussed kind of segues into this. But I wonder how concerned are either of you about the anti-DEI campaigns and how much they're going to spill over into wraparound services, programs to help Latinos get into STEM or whatever they are. I mean, we know they exist. We know there are scholarships that try to address Latino gaps in gaining bachelor's degrees or whatever. How concerned are you? And can this be fixed? Either one of you.
I think it's going to be harmful. You remember DEI, there was a move years ago against quote unquote quotas, even though there were never really quotas, that I've seen that existed from colleges and universities. But in Texas, for example, in 1996, the University of Texas system and the other public college systems did away with affirmative action. UT has since readopted it, but A&M, for example, didn't. And the DEI program was supposed to be a lower step substitute to not using affirmative action. So DEI was a way to go out there and essentially advertise to Latinos, to African Americans, to other underserved communities who represent large parts of the student population, but relatively lower percentages of students at places like UT Austin or Texas A&M. It was supposed to be a way to try to be inclusive, to invite them to apply, to encourage them to apply, to recruit them. And so the states who have come after these programs are not only hurting Latino communities, but really in the end, I think, hurting their universities and hurting the economies of their states. So I'm incredibly concerned about it and its impact, in the years ahead.
I would concur with that. I think there is cause for concern. We have to keep our eyes open and pay a lot of attention to what's happening across the country after this affirmative action ruling came down. I'll speak from the perspective of a nonprofit organization that focuses on a particular group. And so it's widespread. It's not just about what the application or admissions process is for getting into higher education. Consider the many organizations that are out there that are providing supports to our youth of color, our Latino students, to prepare them and ensure that they have the supports to get access and to higher education, the supports they need to thrive in their higher ed experience, and then their career readiness. And so think about that whole group of organizations that focus on the population we're talking about, Latinos, and that's just one slice. You think about higher education, nonprofits, government support, all of those things are subject to this action that's come down. So I think we just have to really monitor, pay attention, and advocate for our students and our families. And we have to keep doing that.
Yeah, I know it's something you could have a whole nother LatinoEd talk about. So I'll leave it there. But you brought up community colleges, Congressman, and I think that's really important. I talked to a dreamer the other day when I was working on an article, and he is graduating from Berkeley with a political policy degree, something like that. And he told me he nearly didn't make it out of school because when he was in high school, his parents, revealed to him that he was undocumented, and he kind of thought, why should I even bother? And his grades just plummeted. And he said that he got his act together. I asked him how he did it, and he said, community college, that it saved him. And he went into community college. He's done really well. He was appointed to a board by the governor to work on student aid issues. And so I just wonder, in terms of community college, is this a good thing for Latinos? Or is it good that our enrollment is high there? Or bad, maybe either or. And then how can we, improve on it? What more needs to be done? You talked about transfer rates. Is there need for something like a farm team kind of system where where students, universities work with community colleges and have that connection in the same way that community colleges work with high schools for the kids now to come out with practically 2 years of college courses already when they're out of school. What do you think about that?
I think on the whole, community colleges have been great for the Latino community. They have been a less expensive way with open doors to allow Latinos to get to start on higher ed, to start on their way towards a degree. As I mentioned, my dad for 2 or 3 years went to San Antonio College and then graduated from UT Austin. And that's the story for a lot of folks. There is definitely room for improvement, though. As I mentioned, the graduation rates at some of our community colleges are low. The retention rates are low and the transfer rates are low. So there's work to do on all of those things. There's a lot of work to do still around developmental education. Developmental education is the graveyard of higher education. When kids take a test like the Accuplacer, and for certain subjects, they have to take remedial or developmental coursework that they don't often get credit for, they often will get frustrated and give up. Or even if they do get out of that, it's taking them extra time to finish off at a community college and then transfer and graduate from a four-year university. Also, there's not been enough cooperation, even though it has gotten markedly better in the last decade or so, but there had not been a lot of cooperation between community college systems and four-year state university systems, or even private universities, for the four-year universities to really honor the coursework at community colleges. Not to say that there wasn't any, of course there was some, but in some places it was very spotty. So in other words, you would have students who would take 3 years of coursework or 2.5 years of coursework at a community college and then transfer that and end up with a 1.5 years worth of credit, right? So now they just spent an extra year of money and so forth that they didn't get credit for at the four-year university they've tried to transfer to. And so it's taken them now a year longer at least to get their four-year degree. And so all of these are challenges that we've got to continue to break down and undo or take on. And it makes a difference. Like, it makes a real practical difference in students' lives when policymakers and advocates are able to take on these challenges and fix them. As I mentioned, these agreements between four-year universities and community colleges have gotten a lot better over the years. But in Texas, going into the 1990s even, there was hardly anything. Some of it seemed ad hoc. And eventually it got better and better as the years went on. But we still got some work to do.
Yeah, Amanda, I wonder if you can just kind of build on that and say, are there enough resources there? Is there still a stigma that, is attached to attending community college? How can they have a better, maybe a transitional role in I know there was a lot of talk about extending education from K through 12 to K to 14 or something like that. And then also there was talk about the 2 free years of community college. I mean, are those things that still have momentum? Are those realistic things, or have we moved on to other ideas?
Well, so let me say a couple things. First, Congressman, I wish when I was going to college that the Transparency for Transfer Student Act was happening, because I was a community college student who that happened to, where my credits did not transfer to my university, where I ended up going. And so it is a big setback financially and psychologically. So I appreciate that you've put this bill forward, and it's a really important one. I fast forward to my serving on a community college board of trustees. I think this issue is super important for those listening to understand that this issue exists. I was quite surprised, I will admit, years ago, upon learning that there was this gap, this issue with transfer credits. And it was really common of community college credits transferring easily to public universities. And I think it's a big concern. And again, I'm glad the Congressman is working on fixing that through policy, because it is a big setback for our students, and an important one for them to understand that exists. And so they have to pay attention to that, our students and families. So what's getting better? I do think, while I just said that, there's an opportunity through more collaboration with community colleges and public universities in strengthening and communicating to our community that 2-year associate degree is the stepping stone to a higher ed a degree at a public university, a 4-year university. And I see that strengthening. I think the work still needs to continue. We do need to provide more resources to that end to make sure that our community college preparation of our students will support them in their success as they transition to a 4-year institution. And I think we should also promote both opportunities. We know that a 4-year degree is going to get our families, our students, in better economic situations, because you just are prepared for more professions in which you'll make more money. And so we want to, I think, balance what we say to our students, that community college is a great stepping stone and an opportunity for careers if you choose, but should also equally be a stepping stone to the higher education you want to continue to pursue.
Yeah, I think that actually yet another great topic for another Latino Ed Talk, because I'd really be interested in what is the gap and why they're not being accepted. You know, are the courses the problem? Where is the issue in the transfer? We do.
Well, can I add one thing, Susanna?
Yeah, go ahead, Congressman. Please do.
I think for a lot of our students, because of their financial situation, they're having to make their higher ed decision almost strictly on cost.
Yeah.
And so that's going to guide you necessarily to start at community colleges, I think, which for a lot of folks, like I said, is great. But I've told folks, if you can start at a 4-year university, if you're able to afford it, if you have the financial aid and you feel comfortable that you're prepared for it, then you probably should. You know, you should start where you want to end up, right? If you can. And so, but that has remained a challenge for a big part of our community.
No, I think that's a really important point. And, you know, I considered it too when I went to University of Texas, but I gave a lot of thought to going to San Antonio College, not just because of financial reasons, but also to help out at home. And I know that's a big factor for many Latino students. It's something that at the University of Texas, El Paso, the former president, Diana Natalicio, built a lot of her curriculum around. And so again, another topic for another Latino Ed Talk. Just to show you that people are listening, we got this question from Juan Cedeño in the audience. He says, you mentioned that Latinos aren't getting college or advanced degrees like Latinas. What can be done to close the gap of Latinos versus Latinas getting advanced degrees? And I'd love to even know more about why that difference, if we know too, as well.
So I'll share my perspective on that. And it starts as early as 6th grade for Latino males in terms of their agency and their frankly, aspirations to even think about college in the future. Because it's at that age, that middle school experience, where our Latino males start to become disengaged and disenfranchised in our education system. It's also in our cultura, our males still in this tradition that our males have to be thinking about working, right? So there's that part of it too. So our cultura, and then also the experience that our males have in our education system that prevents them from having the aspirations, the academic supports to even think about going into college, let alone getting advanced degrees in the future. I think that's something we have to pay attention to, because it starts so young in our boys, in their thinking about their opportunities, such as higher education. So that's one factor that I would mention is why we aren't down the road, why we aren't seeing more Latinos getting advanced degrees.
And I absolutely agree with that. And I think it speaks to the need for interventions in school that really aim towards Latino boys, towards convincing our guys, and helping them prepare for and understand the importance of going to college and the opportunity. I think that would go a long way in helping to close that gap.
I want to add in, I remember working on another story and being told this was someone at University of Denver, I believe, Colorado, Denver, I can't remember. Anyway, that the Metropolitan College there. And they talked about how they're getting a lot of students who feel that they can make a sufficient amount of money to take care of a family in a trade. And because these trades are paying well, I don't know if it's AC or, whatever, but truck driving or whatever, things like that actually have a decent salary. And so they're sort of in this dilemma of not wanting to discourage people from pursuing, maybe it is in a 2-year education that they get that and go into that kind of profession, and these people that don't feel their college material, whatever, but also to try to get them into a 4-year, but that they are seeing more and more, and particularly Latino males that are sort of heading in that direction. So I don't know if that's part of the issue too. Is like, I know that in this country, manufacturing has been on the downslide, but that apparently in the community, there's still this want to work in those kinds of professions. Maybe the father did it. Maybe it's just an easier way to start providing for family. The whole idea of needing to work because you have to take care of a mother or father or siblings, help out with the family, that sort of thing. So I think we're getting close. Anybody else want to submit a question? They certainly can. We have time for one more. April Vargas asked, who we elect as trustees makes a real difference in the policies and innovations that are considered and adopted. What can be done to increase the number of Latino trustees? I think that's a perfect question for Amanda.
Having been one and one of the few, it really matters. It makes a big difference that we have diverse boards of trustees because they do make these decisions. So these are generally appointments made, at the state level. I think this requires a lot of advocacy from Latino groups in our states that think about the leadership that's required at all levels of education, whether it's in the classroom or the boardroom or a board of trustees. We need that representation at all levels for all of this to work in terms of ensuring that our Latino students in particular are getting the education they deserve from early childhood through higher ed. So I think that's a really important question to ask, and one that can be addressed through the advocacy of our own community, as well as really putting a focus on our governments, our state governments who make these kinds of appointments, and demand that there's diversity in who is appointed to these positions, and hold our states accountable to making sure that that happens.
It's interesting, and I don't know, Congressman Castro, you may know these numbers better, but if I think among the 6,000 to 7,000 elected officials and appointed officials in the country, if I'm quoting Naleo's figures right, many of our community are start in positions of leadership in school board posts, and which makes going to what Amanda said, those elections never get a lot of publicity. I certainly don't cover a lot of school board elections, but they have become more and more important, and they're certainly important for our community for that sort of decision making that would elevate into other elevate our students, as well as elevate the person in position to other trustee type positions, etc. But I do kind of wonder where things are being left as we see these controversies happening with school boards and sort of a movement to take over school boards and push it toward a certain agenda. And sometimes that agenda is anti-CRT, anti-ethnic studies, anti-DEI. And I don't want to say anti-CRT is not taught at the public education level, but it's a code word for anything that has to do with Mexican American history, Black history, whatever. I just wonder if you feel that some of these that we're in danger here. Is the community in danger of losing some of the ground it's gained by having Latinos elected to these board positions?
Well, certainly, and I think it speaks to the need for Latinos and Latinas who have an interest in education, who care about their community, to step up and run for these offices. In Texas, public school board members are elected, as well as the community college board members. And so we need folks to step up and run. And you're right, you just take the attacks on books and on the teaching of history. Latinos are already, by and large, the Latino narrative has been largely left out of the telling and the teaching of the larger American narrative. And so that has been detrimental, not only to students, Latino and Latina students, but I think to the entire country, who doesn't understand the value of the Latino community and its contributions to the advancement and the prosperity of the United States of America in any number of fields: government, business, arts, culture, medicine, finance, all of it. And, it starts at a very local level with school board members and even state board of education members who understand this and who care about filling that gap.
Thank you. I think we're going to get close to wrapping up. And as I do so, I just wanted to ask if there's one thing that higher education institutions, and I'm reading this, and or government can do differently to better serve Latinos. If you have any other ideas on the burner, or maybe what we need to do in media. Maybe this is a chance for you to tell me how to do my job better. I
would go to that. That last part that I mentioned about filling in the void in Latino narrative, that is very much a task for our schools. And there is a cost that a price that this community pays for having stereotypes fill in that black hole in narrative, rather than a full appreciation of the historical contributions of Latinos, the studying of Latino and Latina authors, for example. Hardly any are in the canon of literature, or taught as historical figures. So there's a lot of remedial work to do in our schools on that.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to who needs to be at the forefront in our classrooms in teaching that narrative, those credible, trusted adults. And so my view would be that one thing that higher ed can do and our governments can do, our state governments, is to close that diverse student and educator representation gap. The more representation we have of educators that reflect the backgrounds and experiences of our students and our families, the more our cultura will be honored, and it will be a source of pride that our students will feel throughout their educational experience, and propel them to access the education they deserve, the higher education they deserve. So I'm very passionate about this, because we've got to have the mirrors. We've got to have the windows and mirrors for our students. And that can only happen if we invest through policy, as well as through our state budgets, in who our educator pipeline is of the future. And by the way, it's going to be Latino, because it has to be, given the demographic. So I'll end with that.
No, that's actually, and it's a good ending. And I just kind of want to add to that, and maybe you can add some more, but it is hard to see how much, you talk about the numbers increasing, and it's like how it took UT Austin and A&M until I would say the last maybe 3 years ago. I'm trying to remember the year, to actually reach the number to become a Hispanic serving institution. 20 is it 24.6, 25% of your enrolled, is it freshmen? I'm trying to remember the exact statistic, but some 25% of the student body to be Hispanic. And we are in Texas, which we've had, Latinos here forever, but it has its long history. And, the hope is that there will continue to be some bold, aggressive. I think this is something Deborah Santiago once told me, is that we can't close that gap on bachelor's degrees, Latinos having fewer bachelor's degrees than whites, with just, little incremental changes that we see, little increases. We have to have an accelerated increase to catch up, because every time we move up, the share of white people who are students who are getting bachelor's degrees is increasing. So we're never catching up. And I just wonder, in this time, I mean, how do you hope, I guess, that in this time where we're seeing so many attempts to go backwards, do you see us going forward? How do we go forward amongst that? Is the boldness there? Is the innovation there to move us forward, to move, not me, younger people forward? I don't know how you feel about that. Do you think it's there? Are you optimistic?
I mean, I am. Yeah, I think so. Obviously there's like headwinds with this move against DEI and book banning and so forth. So that's going to take a lot of work to push back against. But I do think that there will be, again, a silver lining in all of that, that our community will get more involved in what school districts and school boards are doing. And then in the long run, I think we'll come out stronger because of it.
You agree, Amanda? Are you optimistic? I mean, you work with all the future leaders every day. Are you optimistic it's going to change?
I'm optimistic, and we have to be. We have to be, because our children depend on us being optimistic, but also taking action. So I would say just two things. I think we are seeing the bolder innovations, which means things like career pathways, early college pathways, the things we already talked about that are showing results. There's policy, such as what the Congressman has put forward. There's work like our organization that does a lot of advocacy, as well as focus on accelerating leadership. And that advocacy, I think, has to be coupled with the bold policy. So this is a call to action to our community of Latinos who are on this call, who are out there, that we've got to start uniting our voices to demand the type of bold change we need in education, because we know it matters so much to our students and families. And I'm really proud that our organization has thousands of Latinos in education in our network that we are activating to make sure that their voice is heard at the State House, at the White House. So it's important. And so I think those two things coming together make me optimistic. And we're here, and our voices are loud, and we can make things happen. I do believe that.
Great. Well, I think that's a good note to end on, that kind of optimistic note. Pay attention to the website of Amanda Fernandez and her organization, that there's plans for more of these LatinoEd Talks. And I will thank you to the Congressman for his time, which I know he has to hurry up and wrap up. And thank you, Amanda Fernandez, for inviting me to allow me to moderate this discussion. Thank you, everyone, for coming and for tuning in.
Thank you both.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.